All right, we're back. Data Analysis 2, Part 2. So this is the section on setup and preparing data. This will also be relatively brief. If you're comfortable installing packages, you may not need to pay a great deal of attention to this section, but let me jump into it. So I have started to use the package in preference to the usual install.packages command, which also works fine in R. If you're comfortable using that, use that. Pack, I kind of like the way that it illustrates and resolves the dependencies and gives you a little bit more of a controlled feel of how things are put together. So what we need for this session are 4 packages or sets of packages in the case of the tidyverse. Tidyverse, which maybe you already have if you've been doing this work before. Reticulate, that's the package that specifically interfaces with Python. So the Python code chunks that will be coming up require reticulate. If you're not interested in Python, you don't need that one. Infer and toaster we will use for a couple of brief functions, convenience functions that sort of get a lot of things done later in the session. Actually, most of what we're looking at is straight R or tidyverse. And in this section, I'm not actually going to execute this code right here, but just, the printed out output here is what happens when you load your libraries that you need to. So you can load those libraries. The one caveat here is if you want to run Python, you must use an environment variable to tell R where your Python installation is located. Now that's going to vary depending on your system. The code that I've highlighted here, sys_set_env reticulate Python equals userbin python3, that's where it sits on my system. Figure out where your Python is on your system. The which command in Linux can help with that, and point your reticulate at that location before you run the library command. That'll ensure that you're using the accurate and correct version. And the next section here is we will grab some data, which is really just sample data for us to run our tests and regression on. If you're curious about this data, this is the World Bank's Gender Statistics database, which I use in a few other examples. You can grab the raw data directly, and again, I'll open up some tabs so we can take a look at that to give you the full background, because I do like to make the videos a little longer than I present in person so that you can see all these things, or skip ahead and look at something else. But Gender Data Portal from the World Bank is the World Bank's gateway to their collection of gender data statistics. It's part of their general collection of open data. There's not only gender data, but world development indicators, many other things that they put together. If you go here, you can also learn about the data, download the full data set via CSV. There's also an API. And the point here, the general point I'd like to make, is when you're working with data, the import stage is not automatic in R. It will require you to learn about your preferred data source, learn about how the data is structured, what the variables are, the formats. And so in order to import this data into R, I played around with it in advance. I downloaded the data, I opened it up, I looked at it, I learned the names of the files, the names of the variables. In particular, this collection of gender data has several files in it, of which only one is the primary data file, and so I had to check that out before reading it in, and at this point, I think I would like, I'll outline this and then sort of show the code in RStudio when we start in part 3. Part 3, we will actually jump into RStudio, and I won't just be talking about the code from the website. I will illustrate that. But this get option timeout is just a little optional thing. Sometimes if you have a slow or semi-interrupted web connection, you might want to increase the timeout that it waits for the file to be fully downloaded before quitting or giving up. So that's what happens here. I set the option to 6,000 seconds just in case this is a semi-large file to bring in. Sometimes I've experienced issues with internet connectivity that interrupt that. So we download the file. It comes in from the World Bank in this zip file. Save it locally as gender.zip, unzip it, and then read in the CSV file that is currently called genderstatscsv.csv. I found that this file name is not consistent over time. Next year's update might require me to make some changes to the code. That's the part that you as the end user are responsible for. We read that in, and this is not a session about the cleanup, data cleaning and data wrangling. We have another session on that, and that's going to be incorporated into the revised Data Analysis 1 that is coming in the future. But you can see the code here. What we're doing is we're selecting a few countries of interest. We're doing some cleanup as well. Let's see. So I filter the data by country, filter the data, removing a couple of columns and data that we don't need, and also focusing on the most recent relatively complete year of data, which is 2022 at the time of this recording. And after processing all that, we have a data set that is gender data final, and I'm also adding a couple, because we need a couple of categorical variables just to illustrate some things. So I add 2 categorical variables, female high labor and male high labor, which is simply a test of whether the labor participation rate is higher than 70% for males or females. So that's assigning those new variables. And finally, once I've done all of that modification, I'm going to attach the data. I won't go further into the details of that. Like I said, the data wrangling I prefer to do in a separate session. This is simply so that we have a live example of a sample data set to work with. And we're going to look at things related to labor, gender, fertility, and income. I am enclosing here the definition that the World Bank uses for gender, the social, behavioral, and cultural attributes, expectations, and norms associated with being male or female, just to help clarify how the World Bank views that. Okay, and again, clarification, this is just a demo. We're not really trying to make any claims about these issues that are subject to tons of research. And I will end part 2 here. So we've seen how basically getting our packages and our data set up, which will leave us ready to jump in and do statistical tests in the next section.